I had a request to make a more in-depth video on how to replace the charge port only on an iPhone. Not just the entire charge port assembly, but just the charge port itself. I'm going to be talking about the do's and don'ts, how to go about it, and why do this over replacing the whole assembly like we're so used to doing. Let's get started. Here I've got an iPhone 11 charge port. To make this easier on myself, I'm going to use these little clamps to hold the edges of the flex cable. You don't have to use clamps like this. This will just help me elevate it off of a surface so it's easier to work with. If I clamp it on both sides, then that'll lift the entire charge port assembly off of a work surface. Apple uses a little bit of glue to cover up the solder joints for the charge port. This glue can be quite annoying. With a little heat it'll come off, but this glue also goes under the charge port, the entire portion of the charge port, and kind of holds on to the black cover that covers up the traces on the flex cable. With my heat set at about 250 degrees Celsius and some tweezers, I can carefully and quickly remove this adhesive. To remove the rest of the charge port, I simply need to heat up the entire charge port piece until the solder is liquid under it. This way I ensure to not pull any pads. One of the things that I have to look out for, though, is the other components that are around it. On this particular flex cable, there is a plastic connector that's about a ½ inch away from the charge port itself. I have to worry about the microphones that surround it and a couple other components. There's two ways of doing this. The first being going from the top like I'm doing in this video. You can also approach removing the charge port from the bottom. This will allow you to heat evenly across, and this will also help potentially make it so you can remove it without separating the paint. But because it's kind of glued down, it almost always come off, that black mask that covers the entire flex cable. Once that I've noticed that it's completely separated, we can carefully lift it off. Now what I need to do is ensure that none of the surface area of the grounding planes and other planes that are exposed where I removed the mask are able to receive any of the solder. This will prevent any bridging from happening and also prevent the charge port from sitting as flush as it can against the flex cable. I really just need to be thorough here and make sure I've covered all of the edges all the way up into the edge of all of the pads that I could potentially get solder jumping between them. I like to be thorough, going basically covering up anywhere I might have removed some of the black mask. Once that I'm satisfied with my coverage, I can use a UV light to cure it thoroughly. From MobileCentric's website, I can get this 10-pack for less than $5, so it comes out to less than 50 cents a piece. So let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons of doing this repair. Con, takes a little bit more time and takes a little bit of skill when it comes to soldering. So 1, takes more time. 2, you need the skills and equipment to do it. Other than that, the remaining things are pros. They're all pros because you maintain as much originality as possible. That way you're not introducing an aftermarket flex, for example, or a flex that's been refurbished by somebody other than yourself. Now, if you refurbish it yourself, you know that you've done it correctly. You've got a genuine Apple part in there, minus the charge port that you're installing, which is pretty much as original as it can get. And you are going to be able to maintain the quality of the microphones and the connectors and everything attaching the speaker. So in general, in my opinion, replacing it maintains the most original parts, and that's the way to go when it comes to Apple products. I can use flux to prep all of the solder joints to receive solder. Now I'm going to carefully go over each pad and add a little bit of solder to each pad. This will ensure when I solder the charge port on, it sits flat and I don't have any high points that would prevent some from soldering and others soldering with too much solder. One thing I like to do is wick out the through holes. This will help the charge port sit even quicker down on the flex cable. And I find it to be good practice to tin the bottom side of each pin. If you do this carefully, this will help with the charge port to want to solder as soon as it's up to temperature to the flex cable. It's a lot cleaner and a lot easier that way, and to ensure you've got a good solid joint there. Now, one of the hardest parts of doing this repair, if you've tried this before, is getting it actually soldered back on without melting any of it. So this is it really becomes a balancing act between the heat that you're using, the airflow, and just how aggressive you're being with that. So I like to start at a good distance and gently warm everything up, watching to make sure I'm not singeing any of the plastic. And you kind of experiment with your own soldering station because it's going to vary from station to station. So I can't really give you numbers. I will say I pretty much go, I'd say if you have a machine that goes up to 500 degrees Celsius, 400 degrees is plenty. And then it's just a matter of playing with the distance and airflow to find that sweet spot where things start to melt without, the solder starts to melt without the plastic starting to singe or melt as well. Once I've done that, I like to secure the legs by using those through holes, adding some solder, and that way I can get it to have more stability there, so it's not going to easily come off at all. Now, if you've done everything right up to this point, you won't have to go too much further, but if you really want to, you can do what I like to do, which is to tack each pin individually. To go under there on a microscope, hold it at an angle if you need to, and tack each pin, making sure there's a good flow of solder. As you can see here, I've got a nice ramp of solder going from the pad to the pin on everyone across. That's a good solid joint, and it's good on all ports really. HDMI, Samsung ports, anything where you can visibly see it and do it, that's what you want. And in general, that's what a good clean solder joint will look like. The nice ramp right up onto the pin or leg or whatever it's soldering to. And then one of the last steps is to give it a good thorough cleaning. Most fluxes aren't corrosive, so they're not going to corrode over time, but you're depending on the flux you use, you might have one that is actually corrosive, and the solder can corrode away and get weak. And so I'd recommend thoroughly cleaning it. This will also help when you apply the adhesive to kind of cover that up, to reinforce it, so that it actually has a surface that it can adhere to instead of a oily surface that it doesn't want to grab onto. So clean them to the best of your abilities. And last but not least, we can add some new adhesive to cover this up. It really can be anything as long as it's non-conductive, and most adhesives are non-conductive. You can use hot glue, you can use E8000, you can use cold press adhesive, anything that's going to cover up, protect those joints is highly recommended. Not necessary, but highly recommended. And that's really it. From here, it's just installing it back into the phone and making sure everything's working properly. But if you checked it out under a microscope, it's gonna be good. So that sums up the video. If you guys liked it, please leave a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments below what other videos you want to see me do, break down, go into depth about, and we'll go from there. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.